The year is 2015 and film photography is all but dead and buried. Digital reigns supreme. It has been 15 years since the beginning of the end of film. Cameras like the Canon EOS 5D Mark III were tearing up the scene with its massive 22 megapixels, 1080p video and groundbreaking autofocus. However, despite digital racing miles ahead and leaving film in its dust, banishing it to the storage boxes of old relatives' attics, a small group of product design and engineering experts had a completely different vision of the future of photography. In the same way a flood can sweep away an entire village, it can also leave a few pockets of land undamaged. And it was in these small pockets of life in the film photography community that gave the impetus for the beginning of the reflex camera. First off, let me introduce you to the team behind the reflex camera. First of all, you have the founder, Lawrence von Thomas, who brought with him an entire wealth of knowledge on the culture of photography and photography itself. Most notably, he is the curator of a very, very popular photography Instagram page, If You Leave. The product engineer came from McLaren F1 Racing and brought with him 30 years of engineering expertise. They even partnered up with Abtech, who machine parts for the aviation industry, the automotive industry, among many. If there was ever a team to bring this impossible camera to life, it was this one. You see, the team behind Reflex understood long before the infamous photos of Kylie Jenner and Frank Ocean with their contacts that there will always be a place for physical media. If only the company could have survived long enough to see the likes of HMV come back to their high streets, then maybe they could have avoided their eventual demise. This small but extremely skilled team developed and designed a film camera that truly would have been a game changer in film photography. It was a camera that was in its truest sense a 35mm film camera. However, it provided modern functionality that surpassed any of its predecessors up until this point. This camera wasn't a nod to the past for nostalgia's sake, but it picked up from where it left and updated it for the present and beyond. And after 3 years of developing a camera that camera companies like Sony and Canon wouldn't even make today, Reflex finally announced their intention to throw in their hat in the ring. And in January 2017, they revealed to the world the Reflex camera on Kickstarter. The camera was exciting and it had genuinely unique features that were actually useful. For starters, it had a shutter speed of 1/4000th of a second, a flash sync speed of 125th of a second, which are already huge upgrades from most film cameras. However, this is when it gets really exciting. This camera was built around the principles of modularity and interoperability. What that means is that this camera had interchangeable lens mounts with compatibility with M42, Nikon F, Olympus OM, Canon FD, Pentax K, and on top of that, a changeable film bag. So why is this insane? You see, the most interesting part of film photography is not the bodies. The bodies are just boxes that essentially just block out the light. Real geeks geek over lenses. The most expensive and valuable parts is the glass. So if you want to savor the magic of what a lens can offer, you basically have to dedicate yourself to that system. But with the Reflex, you can try out all of the legendary glass from all of the legendary brands without having to purchase each corresponding body. And the changeable film back, well, that was a functionality that up until this point was only reserved for medium and large formats. Neither of these two things have ever been done on 35mm. But there's so much more. One of film's shortcomings is just pathetic terrible low light performance. And the reflex camera addresses this in camera. Not only does it have a built-in flash, plus a hot shoe if you want to add external flash, but it also has a continuous LED. Now you might be saying 2 lights, that's sort of redundant. Well, the way I would use it is that I would use the continuous LED to help me nail focus in the dark and then switch over to the flash, or not at all. I think this is genius because this is exactly a problem I have with my X100V. I love using the flash at night with my X100V, but the EVF is just not bright enough to pick up details in the dark. So essentially, I'm just guessing whether or not I'm in focus. And having something like a continuous LED would completely solve that. It's such a simple but smart solution. And lastly, just because they could, the camera has Bluetooth connectivity and it connects to their app and it allows users to record their metadata with every frame of the roll. Because how many times have you taken a good or bad film photo and thought to yourself, what did I do wrong here? What were my settings? And you can also charge the camera via USB. Imagine that, not having to carry a battery ever again. This wasn't a new camera trying to be like an old film camera. This was a modern camera that shoots film. This is the camera that would have been made had film never died in the first place. However, and most importantly, this camera was just fun. It has all the beauty of an SLR from the 60s, with the two-tone black leatherette accents on a brushed magnesium alloy body. The silhouette of this camera is both assuring and familiar, but unfussy and understated. You know, I could imagine this camera being used by Vincent Freeman in Gattaca. I was so excited when I first heard about this camera, and I wasn't the only one. In November 2017, the team successfully hit their fundraising target of £100,000, and they even surpassed it, raising a total of £130,000. Things were looking incredible for the Reflex team. They had raised more money than they asked for. They had probably the best team they could probably assemble, and more importantly, an incredible camera, at least in concept. All of the big names in the photo world were frothing at the mouth in excitement at the prospect of the first new film camera in 25 years. All that was left to do was to bring this camera to life. But I don't think anyone could have foreseen, not least the team, the gargantuan task ahead of them. November 2018. 1 year has passed since the initial success of their Kickstarter, and customers have still not received their cameras, despite the timeline saying very clearly that shipping would begin. So much was meant to have happened already. Prototypes, testing, manufacture, community events, and ultimately the first orders. None of this materialized. The team explained in Kickstarter updates that finding the right manufacturers proved to be a lot harder than previously expected. Finding the right materials that met their really high durability standards was also proving difficult. They also said that they couldn't afford to make changes once manufacturing had begun, which is why all the tooling, all the budgets had to be done right first time round. They couldn't afford to make changes along the way. So they ultimately decided to delay first orders. But they had something up their sleeve to keep investors excited. They announced that they would be offering up more products to build out the Reflex ecosystem. And in doing so, in theory, they could order more of the necessary parts for the Reflex camera, but in bulk. And by ordering in bulk, hopefully they would then be able to reduce unit costs, or as they would call it, keeping costs acceptable. These new products included a film processor, a film scanner, and a set of proprietary prime lenses. However, it was also at this point in time that 2 other analog camera projects had just crashed and burned: the Yashica Digifilm and the Meyer optic lenses. In theatre, we would call an event like this one a foreshadowing event. I would love to say that things were about to turn around for the project, but unfortunately, their woes were just starting. The shutter unit would be the first piece of the Jenga tower that would send this project toppling over. Although just 35mm wide, it would inflict significant irreparable damage to the project. Their initial supply of shutter units could no longer be trusted upon. All the other suppliers had proved to become too costly given their relatively small order of just 2,000 units. This development would force them to take on another monumental endeavor because they were left with no choice. They had to now not only design but also manufacture their own custom shutter unit. And if that wasn't enough, they now had to seek further investment. They figured that the only way that they were going to survive is to reduce costs, which meant they had to raise money in order to ramp up production, and in doing so, hopefully reduce unit costs. At this point, they were fighting multiple battles on multiple fronts, and they were bleeding cash. Despite delay after delay, there were 3D renders and even an updated chassis in the Reflex 2 in a black powder coating prototype to show evidence of progress, albeit not enough to put investors' minds at ease. Things were beginning to unravel. Members of the team were beginning to walk out on the project altogether. The firmware and hardware team were just not working together properly. The senior team put this severe case of mismanagement down to their small budget. They said that they were forced to hire people that they didn't necessarily wanted to hire because they were forced to hire people on a project by project basis because of their budget. Enter 2020. Oh God. We all know what happens here.
Virus.
Coronavirus.
Coronavirus.
Viruses.
Coronavirus. The virus.
The coronavirus.
COVID-19.
Coronavirus.
COVID-19.
2020 will be the toughest year of our lives.
Production of parts on the Reflex camera comes to an abrupt halt in their Shenzhen factory. Scheduled major exhibitions at the likes of Photokina were cancelled. And despite glimpses of optimism, such as the completion of their 500 units of their very own custom shutter units, this year was filled with more missed deadlines, more broken promises, and even more frustrated backers. The first signs of the inevitable demise began to rise to the surface. In July of 2020, the team warned the backers that without immediate revenue coming into the company would run out of money and would have to shut its doors. July 2021, the end. Nearly a year goes by since their last update on Kickstarter, and backers are left in the dark over what on earth is going on at the project. They're not happy about this. A particularly strong worded by a certain Mr. Noor is issued directly to the founder and the team. This forces the team to open up an entirely new channel of communication with the backers. There seems to be like a desperate attempt to calm tempers as tensions between investors and team begin to rise. An open forum style Zoom meeting is held in August where all grievances, all concerns, all questions can be asked directly to the team. It is now nearly 3 years to the day since the successful fundraise on Kickstarter in 2018. And in their final update on Kickstarter, dated 21st of August 2021, the team writes that the key to their survival was simple. They needed more money. They needed more money to develop the Reflex 2, and they needed more money to keep paying wages. All they had left in their account was a measly £20,000, nowhere near enough to keep a camera startup alive, and nowhere near enough to refund all the backers. They appealed to their backers, sending out their final distress signal to the world. They asked if anyone would partner with them, if anyone would become a new investor. At this point, the company was willing to pivot away from making cameras if it meant that the company could survive. Final thoughts. It is now March 2024, and there have been no further words from the team on Kickstarter, no further words from the founder on Kickstarter or on any of its social media platforms. It's safe to assume the project has been long dead. Even though I've never had any intentions of purchasing the Reflex, I still followed along intently from the very, very beginning because I wanted so much for this camera to become a reality, which is why it was particularly deflating to see nothing come of it, because it was a camera for people who just love photography. It wasn't about insane burst rates. It wasn't about insane megapixel counts. It wasn't about insane autofocus because it didn't have any of that. And of course, I'm not shitting on those cameras that do have it. I mean, if photography makes you money, then of course those things are important. However, professionals don't lust over cameras, over their working tools. They don't get excited about a Sony A9 in the same way they would a Hasselblad 500cm. And from a completely selfish point of view, I was just not satisfied with the way the project had left things. I still had so many questions. So I wanted to ask directly to the founder, what happened to the project? And in more detail than any Kickstarter update could give, I wanted to hear it from him himself. I reached out to him. He was quick to shut down any possibility of an interview, which is fair enough, I guess. I was hoping that enough time would pass that maybe he would be willing to do it. Who am I anyway? I'm just a YouTuber. Despite all this, I genuinely hope that this isn't the last we hear from the team. Maybe given the introduction of new film camera bodies from the likes of Leica with the new Leica M6 and Pentax and whatever they're about to release, maybe the team might find completely new motivations to revive this project. Perhaps partnering up with the likes of a Sony or a Canon, and that way money will never be an issue. I think there is significant desire for a camera like this. The question is though, who would be brave enough to do it? To me, this camera taps into something in the brain and in the heart that cameras like the Leica M6 and the Fuji X100V does or do. It's not about photography that pays the bills. It's about photography that makes you smile. I hope you guys enjoyed that deep dive. And for me, this took a ton of work. This took so much research, so much time writing the script. And if you enjoyed this sort of deep dive style, then hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments, because I want to do more of these things. And if you don't already follow me on Instagram, please do so, as Zain reviews a photo. And with all that said, I'll see you all in the next one.